In the 19th century, Cornelius Vanderbilt turned this tiny sailboat into America's first railway empire. The key to Vanderbilt's huge success was seizing opportunities in emerging industries. His story holds valuable lessons for anyone looking to build wealth in today's fast-changing world. Wait until the end to discover a practical way you can take advantage of one of today's emerging industries, AI. Born on Staten Island in 1794, the Vanderbilt family was of modest origins. His father operated a small ferry in New York Harbor, which Cornelius had left school at the age of 11 to work on. Only 16 years old at the time, Vanderbilt started his own ferry service, borrowing $100, about $2,000 of today's money, from his mother to buy a periauger, which is this funny-looking tiny boat. His business began simply by transporting passengers and goods between Staten Island and Manhattan. Other captains found him so energetic and eager that they nicknamed him the Commodore, which apparently was meant to mock him, but I think it's a pretty cool nickname. At age 19, Vanderbilt married his first cousin, after which he bought his brother-in-law's schooner, Charlotte, expanding his ferry business. By now, having built a reputation as efficient and competent within the ferry business, Vanderbilt received an offer from an entrepreneur named Thomas Gibbons to captain his steamboat between New Jersey and New York. It's important to mention here that while Vanderbilt became an employee, he kept his own business running as well. Vanderbilt was for the first time at the helm of a large and complicated enterprise. Here is a valuable lesson for any of you wannabe entrepreneurs. Finding yourself a mentor in your industry is essential. Don't put all of your money and time into a field where you have no experience. Gibbons died in 1826. According to author T.J. Stiles, he was obese and diabetic from a life of rapacious eating and drinking. His ferry business was inherited by his son, William Gibbons, who had little interest in running it. Seeing an opportunity, Vanderbilt made a deal to lease the ferry from William, allowing him to operate it independently. By 1829, Vanderbilt focused solely on his personal business. After taking over Gibbons' ferry, he faced growing pressure from established steamboat operators in the Hudson River, many of whom had deep political and financial connections. Rather than fighting a costly fare war that he would surely lose, Vanderbilt left the Hudson River and shifted his focus to Long Island Sound. Wait. A sound is a smaller body of water, usually connected to a sea or an ocean. Anyway, during the 1830s, the United States began to build up their manufacturing base. Textile mills began to pop up all over New England, and these manufacturers needed to be connected to major cities. And so, some of the first railroads in the United States were built from Boston to Long Island Sound to connect with steamboats that ran to New York. Vanderbilt was still mostly operating in the waters of Long Island Sound, and so he was in prime position to witness the potential of railways. In its early days, the railroad industry was chaotic, risky, and more than anything, expensive. Jumping into the railroad industry without any experience would have been immensely stupid. So, Vanderbilt first partnered with the railroad companies to create more efficient connections between the rail lines and his ferry routes. This allowed him to get a close-up view on how the railroad industry operated at the time. Regardless of all the mess and chaos, Vanderbilt realized that the railroad industry had the potential to make a shitload more money than his ferries, because America has a lot of land, and boats can't go on land. In the early 1850s, the New York and Harlem Railroad Company was struggling to make a profit. Vanderbilt seized his opportunity to get into the railroad business by slowly acquiring shares in the company. However, Wall Street speculators believed the railroad was doomed to fail. These speculators began short-selling the stock, essentially betting that its price would drop. Short-selling works by borrowing shares, selling them at the current price, and then buying them back when the price has dropped. Instead of allowing the stock price to collapse, Vanderbilt launched a counterattack. He quietly bought up nearly all available Harlem Railroad shares, steadily driving the price higher. As the stock rose, the short sellers were pretty much screwed. They had a contractual obligation to return the borrowed shares, but Vanderbilt had bought up so many shares that there were almost none left. And so, the price kept going up, and the short sellers were forced to buy back shares at massive losses just to fulfill their obligations. Vanderbilt had crushed the speculators, making millions in the process. This maneuver helped finance his future expansion in the railroad industry. It was a defining moment that showed how Vanderbilt combined ruthless business tactics with a deep understanding of markets. With control of Harlem, Vanderbilt expanded aggressively, acquiring the Hudson River Railroad and then the New York Central Railroad, forming a direct link between New York City and the Midwest. He applied the same aggressive cost-cutting and efficiency-focused management style that had made him so successful in steamboats, setting him apart from all the other investors who jumped in early, thinking the guy who laid the most track would win. Now, unwanted attention comes along with any success in life, so it's not surprising that Vanderbilt would encounter more opposition. In the 1860s, the only bridge connecting New York City and the Midwest was the Albany Bridge. Unfortunately for Vanderbilt, the bridge was controlled by his competitors, who were going to do everything they could to crush his dreams. After months of using the bridge, Vanderbilt's trains were suddenly blocked access. I'm sure you picked it up by now, but Vanderbilt's not really the kind of guy to beg in this kind of situation. You see, his competitors needed access to the crucial New York City market, and guess who controlled the only lines going into New York City? Our good friend Vanderbilt, of course. Now the rival executives had assumed that Vanderbilt wouldn't have the balls to disrupt the flow of commerce because by cutting off freight access, he risked angering the many businesses and merchants that used those lines. Per usual, Vanderbilt chose the strategy that was high risk, high reward, and did exactly that. He understood that his competitors depended far more on access to New York City than he depended on Albany Bridge. And he correctly predicted that they would fold under the financial pressure rather than escalate the conflict. Free to expand westward, Vanderbilt became the undisputed king of railroads. When he died in 1877 at age 82, Vanderbilt was worth $100 million, worth about $4 billion today. However, if you were to measure his wealth by his share of US GDP, then he would be worth about $3 trillion. If you spent $1 million every single day since the birth of Jesus Christ, you still wouldn't have spent $3 trillion. Vanderbilt recognized the opportunities emerging in the industries in front of him. Today, AI is the biggest emerging industry, just like railroads were in the 19th century. AI is especially useful for automating repetitive, large-scale tasks, one of the best examples being lead generation and cold outreach. For businesses, manually reaching out to customers is time-consuming and very costly. And I think AI can be a great solution to this. I've left in the description a free Google Docs with a rudimentary framework on how you could set this up. Remember though that the real difference between success and failure is good execution and persistence over months of hard work, even when there's no guarantee of profit. Work hard, stay focused, and master your fortune. See you next week, and don't forget to subscribe.